sit down. I'm not somebody that likes to sit down very much. You know me, I like to wander around. My name's Mark Sandine. I'm Chair of Sustainable Lexington. I'd like to welcome you here. I'm really happy to see the great turnout and all the interest in how we might become a renewable community, how we might get to net zero emissions in Lexington. So that's what we're talking about today, is Lexington's future renewable. And we have a fabulous panel. So we're going to do today a little bit of an overview of what the Getting to Net Zero Task Force has come up with in terms of recommendations and overarching plans and strategies for how Lexington might get to net zero. The point of this meeting today is for you folks to listen and give us feedback of what you think about that plan so that we can incorporate your thoughts, your ideas, your expectations, concerns, what we're getting right, what we're getting wrong into our final plan. And so tonight, after we do that overview, we've got a great panel here. As you can see, 6 people. Joe Paddo, who many of you will recognize, are from the Lexington Board of Selectmen. Joe, I have known has been involved in climate action, in the Climate Action Task Force, I don't know, more than 10 years ago, before Sustainable Lexington started. And then when Sustainable Lexington started in 2010, Joe became our founding member of the Solar Task Force, which worked on a bunch of the projects that we did on the rooftops and on our landfill. And then he became our selectman. And since he's been the selectman for in Lexington, on the Board of Selectmen, he's been the Sustainable Lexington liaison. So there's probably not anybody in town leadership who's been more interacting with the Sustainable Lexington team. So Paul Gromer is CEO of Peregrine Energy Group, and he's been incredibly involved in all of our efforts, recent efforts and successes here in Lexington. He is, before he was CEO of Peregrine Energy Group, he was Commissioner of Massachusetts Energy Resources, Department of Energy Resources. So if there's anything you want to know about energy in Massachusetts, Paul probably knows what the answer is. So not only that, he helped us do this community choice program, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. But for many of you know that Lexington started the community choice program in July. And we moved all of the residents who are on basic service over to 100% renewable energy for less money than they're paying for Eversource electricity. Paul also conducted the key part of the first step here along the way in terms of figuring out getting to net zero. We have to figure out where we are. And Paul, Peregrine Energy, conducted the energy baseline for the town of Lexington, and we'll talk about some of the results that came out of this in a little bit. But Paul did a fabulous job on that. And you'll notice we got lots of Pauls up here. Paul Elfenkamp, I've known Paul at least 10 years, something along that lines. Paul is the owner of Big Meister, which is just an outstanding firm that does high performance, high quality residential retrofits. I put him down here at start and I said, you know, he's a residential energy expert. And I said, no, that's not strong enough. Because Paul is really the expert's expert. When the experts want to know something about how to retrofit a building, they call Paul. And Paul tells them what the deal is because he's been doing it for over 30 years. So Craig Foley, I haven't known quite as long as the rest of the folks. He came to a Sustainable Lexington meeting the other night, and he really knows his real estate, and he's been active for many years in terms of how do you value high-performance real estate, how do you value energy-efficient real estate, how do you value solar on real estate, and has a lot of really cool insights I think you'd be excited to hear. Paul Lucas is an architect who lives in town. He is also the author of a book called Suburban Transformation, excuse me. He's a net zero task force member. He's internationally known for doing net zero designs at residential and community levels, and again, has tremendous insights in how a community can move from where we are today to where we want to go. And Lisa Fitzgibbons has been the co-chair of the Net Zero Emissions Task Force. Probably none of us would be here tonight if it wasn't for her and her efforts in order to sort of encourage us to live to our values. Lisa's not only doing this in Lexington, but she got Concord going on this as well. And so, she's moving all the Lexington, Concord, sort of revolutionary towns forward. So with that, I just think you're going to really appreciate what they had to say. The idea is now, I'll give you just a little bit of an overview of what our Getting to Net Zero Emissions Task Force has come up with for a plan, and then they'll each reflect on that from their perspective, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So, our Getting to Net Zero Emissions goal is we're putting together a plan to take us over 25 years to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from residential, commercial, and municipal buildings, all the buildings in town. And the idea is to help us transition to a renewable energy future. The reason we picked buildings was when we did our energy baseline in Lexington, we found out that a baseline of all the emissions that are going on within the town of Lexington, we found out that our buildings are responsible for something on the order of 66% of all of our emissions. That works out to about 36% of our emissions come from electricity, and so all the electricity in town goes into a building in some form or shape or other, and the rest of that 30% comes from oil and natural gas that's used to heat our buildings. So that's 66%. We have about 25% of our emissions come from our cars, from our vehicles. We have a little bit from food, we have a little bit from waste. A lot of people tend to think, we'll be talking a lot about municipal sort of actions later on, but a lot of people tend to think that when these types of communities get together, we're talking about how does the town's municipal energy emissions go to zero. That's not what we're talking about tonight, because the town's municipal energy emissions are about 2% of the total emissions in the town of Lexington. So we're here to talk about, yes, the 2% that the municipal is doing, sort of from a leadership perspective, but we're here to talk about how do we address the other 98%. And so the way we do that, we have a mantra we like to call it report, reduce, produce, and purchase. This is really the sort of big, sort of major steps that we think we need to be going through in order to get to net zero. So the first step you have to do is you have to know what your current status is. How much energy are our buildings using? How much emissions is that energy causing? And what type of buildings and what type of ownership and how do we influence those things? So where do we stand right now? So that's the report part of it. The reduce, there's really only two things you can do to reduce your emissions. You can either use less energy or you can use cleaner energy. And so we'll be talking about both of those things. So there's how do we invest in energy efficiency in order to reduce the amount of energy that we're using? How do we switch from a fuel perspective from dirtier fuels to cleaner fuels? And then finally, we have this notion of produce, which is we'd like to see every building in town producing the maximum amount of energy from its own rooftop, from its own property. So that's the sort of idea. How can we maximize the amount of energy that's coming from solar power, primarily in the Lexington area? We have very little wind from a wind perspective, so if we're looking at renewable energy, we're basically looking at solar energy. And then finally, because we're not going to be able to generate all of our electricity on site, we're not going to be able to reduce our energy needs to zero, we're going to have to purchase energy. And so can we buy renewable electricity to cover the rest of the energy that we're not producing for ourselves? So that's sort of the big mantra. I've talked a little bit about our panel, and a number of the panel members here are on the Net Zero Task Force. But what we decided we needed to do if we were going to be successful with this is a notion that came from Cambridge. We're following in the footsteps of Cambridge, who's probably a couple of years ahead of us on this net zero plan, is that we need to have stakeholders represented from residential, from commercial, and from municipal sources. If we are going to be successful, we want to have a diversity of opinions about how we get there. So Joe is, as I mentioned before, on our Board of Selectmen. Gene Krieger is Joe is also formerly chair of the Board of Selectmen. Gene Krieger used to be on the Board of Selectmen, who was also formerly the chair of the Board of Selectmen, and at least famously for me, she was the one who encouraged us to get on to become a green community, to adopt the Stretch Energy Code, and she passed the first sustainable building policy in 2005 for the town. So she's been all in on sustainability for a while. I've already introduced Paul Lucas. We have another architect, Wendell Kelso, who's also in the historical commission in town. He has tremendous experience in how to deal with historical buildings. We have something on the order of 25% of our building stock in town is historic buildings, historical buildings. They have special constraints if we're going to retrofit those buildings. From a commercial property, something on the order of 2/3 of our electricity goes to our commercial property owners in town. So we have to take really high care that we're addressing the needs of our commercial property owners if we're going to figure out how to get to net zero. We have 3 great people on our task force. King Street Properties is an up-and-coming developer in town. They're one of the largest property owners in town. Boston Properties, I believe, is the largest property owner in town, both King Street and Boston Properties rent properties out. They're landlords, and our largest owner-occupied company building in town is Shire. They have something on the order of 700,000 square feet in town, something along that lines. Far and away, one of the largest electricity and energy users in town. And they've got a great guy from their environmental team on this task force as well. Janet Terzano is a local Lexington resident and real estate agent who I think she's been in town for most of her life, I believe. Alessandro Alessandrini from the school committee, goes without saying. Melissa Tentakoulis is the economic development director. She's the one that's coordinated our activities with our commercial property owners. And finally, Lisa Fitzgibbons and myself have been also on the stakeholder task force. So let's go into where we are. So these are the things that Paul Gromer created for us. I'm going to present them, but Paul was the author and did all the research, many hours of research. Thank you very much for all your efforts on that, Paul. What we're looking at here, we're looking at our emissions by building type. And what this is telling us is that if we exclude the electricity that the military is using from the town of Lexington, NSTAR, Eversource looks at Hanscom Air Force Base electricity in the town of Lexington. If we exclude MIT Lincoln Labs and the Air Force from our numbers, what we're seeing is that about 55% of our emissions come from residential buildings, and about 34% of our emissions come from office space, labs, and office buildings. There's some nonprofits and schools and things along that lines, but that's the main mix. So if you add those up, that's almost 90% of our emissions come from residential homes and commercial buildings. So what you want to do is you want to look first at what your baseline looks like in terms of when your buildings are built and what the size of your buildings are built. And what you can see here, let me see if I can do this here. What you're going to see here is that in the 50s and 60s is when we built most of our homes. So, and most of those homes you see from this sort of yellow dot here, those homes were about 1,200 square feet on average in size. And so what we're seeing here is that the number of homes that we've been building have dropped off dramatically, but the size of the homes have gone up dramatically. This dot says something on 4,000, but our permitting data shows that the average size of a new home in Lexington right now is 4,700 square feet. So that's 4 times larger than the homes we were building in the 50s and 60s. So there's something to think about there. The other interesting thing that Paul determined is that a lot of people, when they hear this thing that we say that the average new home is 4,700 square feet, they say, oh my God, we got to do something about this. These McMansions are going up everywhere. And what you find out when you look at the number of permits is that we are tearing down a house and putting up a new one. It's about 0.75% a year. So I know it looks like there's lots and lots of houses going up all over the place, but the fact is that most of our homes that are with us today are still going to be with us tomorrow, and are still going to be with us 30 years from now, 40 years from now. So that's something we really need to think about, and the panel's going to talk about in greater detail, which is if we're going to get to net zero, if we're going to move to 100% renewable, we're going to have to do it in a way that retrofits our existing homes. We're seeing this very similar kind of thing in the commercial construction side. Only in this case, it's 50s through the 80s is when most of our commercial buildings were built. So if you go out and you go out to Hartwell Avenue and look down there, you'll see that most of those buildings are built in the 50s and 60s. And you can tell just from looking at the outside of the buildings, that's when they were built. And the other thing is that, yeah, we're building a lot fewer buildings now, but again, their size is almost doubled in the area as well. So those are some interesting things to think about. From a natural gas perspective, when we get our data from National Grid. National Grid's been giving us data at an aggregate level, where they're willing to tell us how many customers they have in town, how many of those customers are residential heating customers, how many of those are commercial heating customers, and what we're seeing is that the trend is up. We're using a lot more natural gas, but the reason for that is we've been transitioning since about 2008. A lot of people have been moving off of heating oil to natural gas. And so what you're seeing is that our heating oil use has been going down year by year by year. So these things have been about evening out. From an electricity use, we have a tremendous, I mentioned, we have more of our emissions coming from electricity than we do from heating our buildings. And this is really a very nice slide. I really like this. It looks to most people like nothing much is going on, but there's actually a lot going on here. What you're seeing is that electricity use in Lexington's been going down about 1% a year. Same thing with Massachusetts overall. You may have heard that Massachusetts is now, for 7 years in a row, the #1 state in the country for energy efficiency. We have been leading the country for 7 years in reducing the amount of energy we use. The interesting thing is that both Lexington and the state have been rising in population during this time frame. So we're up, I don't know, what would you say, Joe? We're up 6.4% over this time, and our energy use has been going down 1% a year. The interesting thing is, as Paul has pointed out in his report, is that prior to this time frame you're seeing here, it used to be that our electricity use was going up 2% a year. So we've had a 3% delta, and it's on top of significantly higher GDP growth and population growth. But the real story is, even though our electricity use has been so close to flat, a little bit down, our emissions for our electricity has been dramatically lower over the last 10 or 20 years. And the reason for that is that we've been shutting down our coal plants. Braden Point, our largest coal plant, is completely shut down. I think there's one left, I believe. I think there's one coal plant left in Massachusetts. And so what we've been doing is we've been substituting in natural gas for coal power plants, and that's been driving our emissions down. What you'll see here, I think I can show it, you'll see right at the end there, is that we actually trended up a little bit. And that's because Vermont Yankee shut down. And so what ended up happening is we had essentially carbon-free emissions from the nuclear power plant at Vermont Yankee, and now we've substituted in some natural gas for that. So the question is, if we need to get to 100% renewable, how would we do it? And as I mentioned before, Paul has helped us tremendously in Lexington. We are the first community in the state of Massachusetts who is able to move to 100% renewable electricity for lower price than Eversource. And Paul will be talking about that a little bit more. But if we can do that as a community, what that's indicative of is that the price of renewable energy has been coming down over time. So it wouldn't have been possible even 2 years ago. It wouldn't have been certainly not possible 10 years ago. So the community choice program has been in place since 1997. And the reason hardly anybody was doing it was because there was really not a lot of value to doing it prior to renewable energy coming down in price. So I think when we first started talking to Paul, there was maybe 12 or 15 or 17 communities that had gone with community choice. So we were feeling kind of out there out of 351 communities that were going to go community choice. Now what are we, 120, something like that? So something on the order of a third of all the communities in Massachusetts have adopted community choice. And for many of them, the reason to do it is to go to greener and less emissions. And so that's sort of what we want to talk about is the framing for what we're going to be talking about for our overall energy transition. And what you're looking at here is a model that the task force put together. And what you're looking at here, this top line, is something that we call business as usual. If we do nothing. If we just sort of let things ride. Right now the state has a renewable portfolio standard, which is increasing the amount of renewable energy in our electricity by 1% a year, but we're assuming in a business as usual case that people's energy use will be increasing more than 1% a year. And so what you see over time if we do nothing is that our emissions would go up. This blue area here is, can we use the lessons we've learned last July in community choice? Can we switch ourselves faster to 100% renewable energy than the state is doing it? And the answer is yes, we've been able to do that for all the people on basic service. That turns out to be something on the order of 107, 110 million kilowatt hours out of 300 and something billion kilowatt hours. So we moved a good chunk. But a lot of our customers, the town, for example, is on a competitive supply agreement. They didn't move. A lot of our big commercial customers are on competitive supply agreements. They didn't move, but our residents have moved. Where we are right now is that unchanged is reducing 98 million pounds of CO2 per year from our emissions, and it's actually saving us $1.6 million a year in our residents' energy bills, their Eversource bills. So the idea of this plan here is that we're sort of right here in this thing. We've just taken this big step down for moving residents over. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to figure out how to move people like the town and Shire and Boston properties and King Street properties over to 100% renewable. If we're able to do that over the next 25 years, that's going to reduce our emissions in half. Something on the order of 48% of our emissions will be reduced by moving to clean electricity. So the next thing we want to talk about is if we're able to achieve that goal, we're able to convince, and why wouldn't you? If you can pay less for 100% renewable energy, why wouldn't you do that, right? So if we can convince our commercial owners to go along with our residential property owners to go to cheaper 100% renewable energy, well then the thing you want to think about is how can we switch our oil and gas over to electric? And so I'm looking at Sean here, and Sean, our assistant director of Department of Public Facilities here, who has been heavily involved in what we do from going all electric in town. And so we've been making the transition. How can we move our own buildings from fossil fuel sources to electric sources? And if the town is able to do that, then we can move our natural gas. The town's not using any oil anymore, is it? No, right, so the town's already switched all their oil to natural gas, and so now what we'll be looking at is how do we move from natural gas to electric heating pumps. The idea is, for all of you residential folks in the audience here who have oil at home, what we're seeing right now is from an economic perspective, oil is significantly higher cost than moving to an electric heat pump. And so we think a lot of people will be able to want to move from oil to electric for the health reasons, for the comfort reasons, for the savings reasons, in addition to emissions reasons. And we think that's going to work very well. The other side of things, though, is that natural gas right now, the price of natural gas is really low. And for people to switch from natural gas to electricity right now is going to be a disincentive from an economic perspective. And so the question is, how would we convince folks to move from natural gas, which is a little bit cheaper than electricity? And the answer is, what we want to be focused on, and Paul will be talking to us about this a little bit, is how can we reduce the amount of energy that our buildings are using by doing energy efficiency, by investing in the envelope of our buildings, by using higher efficiency boilers, by using higher efficiency lights, etc. And if we can bundle those two things together, where if you can reduce the amount of energy your home is using, at the same time you switch from natural gas to electricity, we think we can make this pay back in a reasonable amount of period for homeowners. And so that's sort of the next step along the way, is we bundle in energy efficiency retrofits. And then finally, the idea is something of the order, and the other Paul is going to talk to us about this, about, well, all those 1% of buildings that we're building right now, that we'd like to be building to be net zero, is that possible? A lot of people have questions. Is it possible to build a net zero residential building in Lexington? And Paul will answer that question. But from a task force perspective, we think the answer is yes, and probably in about 10 years or so, we think we'll be ready to have a net zero energy code for new residential buildings. So we'll be talking about how that goes. The task force has recommended a number of things to the Board of Selectmen. As I mentioned before, the town uses about 10 million kilowatt hours of electricity a year. They've signed up for a competitive supply agreement over 3 years that expires in December of 2018. So sometime in the middle of next year is the right time for the town to think about, maybe we should be trying to do 100% renewable when we go out for our electricity supply. The second thing is, our commercial property owners need to be investing in these energy efficiency retrofits and putting clean energy on their buildings. And the state has just come up with a new program. It's called Commercial PACE. It stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a tool that allows property owners to invest in renewable energy or energy efficiency in a way that stays with the property. So if they're not sure how long they're going to own the property, for 4 years, for 5 years, for 6 years, and the payback on this is maybe 10 years, they can invest in this, they can get a cash flow positive payback immediately, and when they sell the building, the property assessed clean energy loan stays with the building, and it doesn't have to be paid off by the commercial property owners. So it's a tool that we can provide as a town to our commercial property owners to encourage them to come to Lexington, to encourage them to invest in their buildings. So what we believe is going to happen, it's a really interesting conversation we had with the commercial property owners. They said, how can I get you to invest in your buildings? They said, we're not going to invest in our buildings, right, unless there's some real value to it. And so if we can allow this loan to help them out, they're going to bring higher value clients to town. They're going to invest in their properties. They're going to have higher desirability for their properties, which means that property taxes will go up, which means hopefully our property taxes as residential will go down. So that's at least the idea. From a final perspective, what we recommended to the town is that we want to update. Remember, I mentioned Gene Krieger signed this, put in place a policy, the sustainable design policy in 2005. We think it's time to update that policy and reflect the current standards that are available in the market price right now. Our Board of Selectmen has, and Joe will talk about this in a couple of minutes, made the decision along with our school committee to go all electric for the Hastings School, and Joe can talk about that a little bit more, but I think it'd be helpful to have a sustainable design policy in place from a leadership perspective. So that's how we tie it all together. That's the overview of the plan. And so the next thing up I wanted to do was turn it over to Joe Pato and have him give a couple words from his perspective, from the town's perspective.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to talk to municipal governance and Lexington in particular. And first, let me tell you the secret to being successful at this. Bob, Mark, Sandy. Lexington is blessed with a wide number of really great volunteers that contribute to the community, and Mark is among the top of that list. And he is not alone. Lisa, Judy is in the audience, and a number of other members of Sustainable Lexington here. We would not be able to be doing what we are doing as a community without the degree of engagement we have from these wonderful residents, and I can't say enough. I also won't be speaking as fast. From a town government perspective, essentially we have 3 areas that we think about, or I think about. One is process, how do we go about doing things? The other is regulation, how do we go about making other people do things? And then end user, we are only 2% of buildings, but we are an end user, and we look at what we do both as a model for other sectors and to do well. So let's start with process. Being committed to climate action is something that's been dear to my heart for a while, and town meeting joined us in that commitment in 2013 by passing a resolution requiring all town actions to take into account climate change. That's actually, it sort of sounds touchy-feely good, what is a resolution? Well, the reality is that we've taken it to heart. And when we look at projects, we turn around and say, so, what is the impact here? How do we think outside of the box a little bit and look at ways that we can do better for mitigation or adaptation, and really think about the sustainability of what's going forward. So town meetings set the stage. The Board of Selectmen bought in, which is good. And an example of that is earlier this year, we went ahead and declared our adherence to the Paris Climate Accord. And we signed on to the Compact of Mayors as the first town in Massachusetts to say, yep, we are in. And we will work to establish our policies so that we are reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the like. Town meeting and the executive board, the executive selectmen, created the Net Zero Task Force. We appropriated money to hire consultants and build a plan. You can't actually do things unless you measure what you have and have a plan and then execute it. That's what we're in the middle of right now. Part of that plan is public engagement. And it's not just a one-way conversation about what are we trying to do, but getting in the community to buy in and look at what they can do and give us guidance as to, are you pushing too hard? Are you not pushing hard enough? So that's part of what we're looking for tonight, and it's not a one-time event. It's a continuing amount of engagement. As a community, we look at planning short-term, long-term, very long-term, all the time. And one of the things we're doing right now is revising our comprehensive plan, which is looking at what we want for ourselves as a community, from land use regulations, traffic management. This is going to be a 2.5-year process, which is getting kicked off now. The work of this committee and the work of our sustainability initiatives are input into that comprehensive plan as we look at how does that realize itself in what you do for recreation, what you do for laying out traffic management and buildings. So that begins to transition over to regulation. We look at local regulations, that's what we can implement here in town, and adopting the stretch code about a decade ago was an example of that. And looking for creating new pieces. Now, as a community, we're part of a commonwealth. We don't actually get to say, oh, the building code is going to be. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts gets to say that. But we do work with our state legislative delegation, and we push and say, let's advance our statewide laws and regulations to better accommodate our needs. And then there's national. So I already spoke about national, let's leave that alone. The only thing I will say is Mark mentioned that we have excluded Hanscom Air Force Base and MIT Lincoln Labs. And the reason we do that is they are both federal entities as far as their structure, and we have no influence. Right. We try, but we are focusing on, as I said, measure what you are doing and then work at what you can do. Let's focus on the local pieces, and then let's keep trying to get something going at the federal level. Some of the local pieces are, it's not just regulations, but it's taking advantage of statewide programs. So adopting the community choice aggregation program that Mark mentioned both saves dollars for our residents and it reduces significantly greenhouse gas emissions. Commercial PACE is another example as an incentive for our commercial sector to move forward more quickly. And we're constantly looking for those kinds of programs and working with our delegation to create some of those. As an end user, we have a number of buildings, vehicles, et cetera. So the sustainable building policy design was a first stab at this, now almost a decade ago, and it's time to revise it. We're close to having an agreed upon revision. And elements that are in there are things like moving to all-electric buildings. And the recent large construction projects that were approved in a debt exclusion vote on Monday, thank you all, are exactly that. They're buildings designed with sustainability issues in mind and are moving to using more greener and healthier electric and power systems. There's more we would like to do, but one of the things I've learned a while ago is be happy for what you can get and keep pushing. And it's good to actually have aspirations that are a little beyond. And you keep moving along. It's okay if you don't always get everything. But don't, tomorrow keep coming back and ask for the next thing. We work on power purchase agreements, both for things like the solar panels that we have on our municipal buildings and on the Hartwell Avenue site, and for our competitive arrangements for power we're purchasing for the town. We have deployed a reasonable amount of renewable energy. I think it's about 45% of what the town consumes as a municipal entity is coming from solar panels on our buildings and at the Hartwell Avenue site. This is saving the town on the order of $450,000 to $500,000 a year in avoided expenses for electricity charges. So it's not only good for the environment, it's good for our bottom line. And we're looking at these things not just for power production, but we're looking at moving toward quieter emissions-free equipment in our lawn care for DPW, in our vehicles. DPW has purchased a number of lawnmowers and leaf blowers that are electric powered, and part of that is because we want to be good citizens on greenhouse gas emissions. Part of it is because we want to be good citizens with respect to abutters and neighbors and use lower noise production. So there's a lot we can do. There's going to be more, and I count on you to keep us honest. Thank you.
This one? Great, thank you, Mark.
You have to press the button.
Great, is that better? So thanks. So as Mark explained, Paul Gromar with Peregrine Energy Group. We're a consulting firm, and we've been assisting Lexington with its community choice aggregation program. And I'll just give you a few of the highlights for that and then some of the goals for the program going forward. As Mark explained, it's a group buying program where the town selects an electricity supplier for the community. And Lexington chose to use that tool to achieve or to obtain 100% renewable energy supply for Lexington. There are, as Mark said, there are about 120 communities across the state that have community choice aggregation. So far, about 10% of them are using it to go green, but that's definitely the trend, and more communities are looking to do that. Let's talk for a minute about who's in the program now, and you can see that on the chart behind me. There are about nearly 10,000 utility accounts that are part of the town program. It's the great majority of the town's residential accounts, over 9,000 of those, or about 80% of the total. And then about half the business accounts, but only a little bit less than 10% of the business electricity. And that's typical for aggregations. The way aggregations work is they automatically pick up the electricity accounts where the account owner has not chosen a competitive electricity supplier. That's nearly all the residents, and it's most of the small businesses, but most of the big businesses have already made their choice of supplier, so they don't become part of the program automatically. They would have to join. Let's talk for a second about how much this costs. Mark, can you flip to the next slide? So the program launched with the goal of being 100% renewable and a tiny bit less, at least a tiny bit less than the Eversource basic service price, so that the residents could get something greener that would cost a little bit less. And the program achieved that at program launch, and you can see that with the bars on the left. So the blue bar is the price for the average monthly charges for someone who is on Eversource basic service. And then that dark green bar next to it, a smidge lower, is the average charge for someone who's part of the aggregation program. So that's how it worked for the first 6 months. Starting in January, the financial performance is much better, or even better. The Eversource price will go up quite a lot on January 1st, but the aggregation price will stay the same. And so for the 6 months from January to June, participants in the aggregation program not only get 100% green energy, will actually save about $20 a month on their electric bill. Now, that's more than was hoped for, and I don't have any expectation that that level of savings will continue going forward. The Eversource price is certain to drop back down again next summer, but at least for the next 6 months, this is both a big winner, both environmentally and financially. Let's talk for a second about the environmental impact, which is really the reason that we're all here tonight. Mark, could you go back to your slide that shows the, I don't even know what to call that kind of graph, but the one that shows the impact of community choice? Waterfall graph. All right, you're here. So you learn a new word every day, so that's mine for today. So the program is already having a big environmental impact. And where we are now is the aggregation program is the, I guess that's purple, that darkish blue color there that's highlighted, and we're to the left side of it. So already the aggregation program is having a big environmental impact. But Lexington being Lexington, having launched the most successful aggregation program in the state, that's not enough, and there's a goal to do more. And to grow that size of the big purple waterfall, a piece of the waterfall, to make it bigger and to accomplish or achieve really almost half the emission reductions that are in the town's goals. And the way to do that is to get more participants in the program. So the first group, and if we can go back to my slide that shows the graph of who's in. The first group is the additional residential customer. So if you're 80% of the residents are in now, the first goal would be to get that other 20% into the program. And where the program is financially now, I can't believe there's any offer that those residents could be receiving that's better than what they can get from the town program. The next goal is the commercial and industrial customers, the biggest customers. They're a harder nut to crack because they enter their own long-term contracts. They're big themselves, so they can achieve a good price in the market. But perhaps starting with the municipal buildings, where the town's buildings might want to either join the program or purchase green electricity supply through another venue, that would be another goal for them. And then to try to get the other big businesses in town to similarly get 100% renewable electricity, and really to get those businesses to follow the leadership of the residents in the community. So that's where the program is today, and those are some of the goals going forward.
And Paul is rather modest. When we ask Paul something, he says, yes, we'll figure out a way to make that happen. And one of the things that Paul has done is he's put together 3 different options for commercial customers. Very attractive options. Who knows which ones the commercial customers will take, but he's gone out and done some things outside of the box in order to help us achieve these goals. I can't thank him enough for that. And I need some water. But we're going to switch things over to Craig, who is our residential real estate expert, evaluation expert.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for inviting me to this. My name is Craig Colby. I work with RE/MAX Leading Edge as a real estate broker. We have 10 or 11 offices now, 200 agents. My title is Chief of Energy Solutions, which nobody in our firm knows what that means exactly. But as solar PV is really exploding in the state, I mean, virtually overnight, we have 70,000 homes now with PV in the state. The realtors in my office, I'm getting 2 questions a week about what do I do with a home sale with solar photovoltaics on the home? How do I handle that transaction? So that's been a big focus in the marketplace. Another thing that I do is I have a firm called Sustainable Real Estate Consulting Services, so I do a lot of consulting work on a national level with National Association of Realtors, with the Appraisal Institute. I do a lot of real estate education through that work on high-performance homes, and that's what my business is all about. I'm really excited to be in a place where high-performance homes is what I sell, it's what I consult on, and it's what I teach. It's a pretty cool place to be. So this, what you see up here, high-performance home, get a 9 to 13% premium in the marketplace. Please don't believe that, because it's dependent upon a lot of different sources. You know, these are national numbers. We're certainly seeing high-performance homes get a price premium in the marketplace. And I'm going to give you an example of a project that I'm working on right now where those numbers are actually a little bit conservative. But in general, you've got to realize that all real estate is local. So if you showed this picture to a local real estate agent or a local appraiser, and you didn't have a maturing green marketplace, they probably would roll their eyes at you, partly because, you know, they may not see it in their marketplace. And despite the fact that when Mark mentioned the 4,700 square foot homes, he looked directly at me like it was my fault. You know, that's demand in the marketplace, obviously. That's what's creating that. It's not the realtor that's creating that. It's demand, and it's consumer demand in the marketplace. And we're starting to see this being a demand in the marketplace as well. Really exciting to say that. And there's a, you know, we're a fairly reactionary trade organization, obviously. It wouldn't surprise me if you have a home with solar PV on your rooftop, or you've gone through the Mass Save program and done some air sealing and insulation work and invested in an air source heat pump, that if you were to show that to a real estate agent and saying, I'm selling my home, what's the value in this stuff, that it wouldn't be unusual for the real estate agent to roll their eyes at you. And that's a real problem in the marketplace. We're at a transition point where we're starting to see realtors, appraisers, lenders, underwriters realize that there's a market opportunity here. I mentioned I'm doing a lot of work with NAR right now, National Association of Realtors. We just hired a director of sustainability in the middle of 2016. We just started, it's going to be starting in 2018, a sustainability advisory group in which the largest trade organization in the United States, NAR, is going to be looking at a triple bottom line, focus on how we run our business. Big transitions going on in the marketplace. The Appraisal Institute published something called the AI Green and Residential Energy Efficient Addendum. If you Google AI Green Addendum, you'll find a PDF that pops up on that. We're training realtors and appraisers how to use that addendum. That addendum was originally built in 2011 because in the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, the appraisal report that every appraiser uses in the marketplace, there's one line item for energy efficient items on that. Now, I'm selling a set of condos on Fort Hill right now in Boston that are LEED Platinum certified. The two rooftops, 4 units, have a 31.68 solar PV system on the two rooftops. The HERS ratings are -14 to -22, so they're beyond net zero. They're on the other side of net zero. They're energy positive. What's that?
You need to explain what
HERS rating, yes. So like your golf score, the lower the better with your HERS rating. And we anticipate that DOE says average HERS rating on a home that doesn't have insulation on it in the US is probably 140. The 2006 IECC code built home is the reference point. That's a HERS rating of 100. To get down to LEED level, you know, you're looking at, you know, certainly LEED Platinum, you're looking at HERS ratings of 30 to 40. You add some solar PV onto that, you have an ultra-tight building envelope like we do, and you get to the holy grail, which is net zero. And like I said, on the marketplace right now in Fort Hill, we have 4 condos that are -14 to -22. On the market right now, this is part of the marketplace right now. And just, I'll finish with this quickly. We're competing with some new construction right down the street, built to code. They have 7 units. They have 1 under agreement. We have 4 units. Put the 3rd one under agreement earlier this week. Expect the 4th one will be under agreement. Hopefully I hopefully will have to do an open house on Sunday is what I'm shooting for. And our price point is $450 to $460 a square foot. The new construction down the street is priced at $370 to $380 a square foot. the price premium from a LEED Platinum property that's beyond net zero, that's energy positive, it's very clear in the marketplace. And in fact, one of the listing brokers of the project down the street has the buyer that just put the third property under agreement this week. And I can guarantee you, she tried very hard to get that buyer to buy the development that she's listing. And the buyer, who's a builder, interestingly enough, clearly saw the value in the value proposition of these homes on Fort Hill. So I guess one of the simple message here is that there are realtors, there are appraisers, there are lenders in Massachusetts that have taken the extra steps to become knowledgeable and competent in this part of the industry, and you have to use those professionals that have done that kind of work if you want to see any kind of a price premium. You know, we have tools, the PV value tool, where we can look at an income approach to property for host-owned solar PV. If you own the solar PV system, we can use an income approach to add that onto the property. If you don't get a qualified appraiser, a green certified appraiser, they won't know how to use that document. So it's exciting to be in this part of the marketplace right now, where we're seeing that there's a value proposition. You know, we have 11 appraisers in the state right now that are qualified appraisers, green certified appraisers through the Appraisal Institute. A year and a half ago, that was 0. In about 2 months, we're going to have over 30. So we're seeing appraisers, lenders in the marketplace, real estate agents understand that this is an opportunity in the marketplace. And we're certainly willing to meet more than halfway for all the great work that Sustainable Lexington is doing to move the ball forward.
Thank you. So if you can get $100,000 or $120,000 more for a home, why wouldn't you want to do that? So Paul Eldrenkamp will talk to us about how you actually get your house to that status. Some of the good thoughts about how to get it.
So I'm going to back up a little bit before I get to that, Mark, because I've been fixing houses for 35 years now, and I have there's a few things I'm fairly confident of. There's a lot of things I'm not confident of, but let me start with the things I'm pretty confident of. One is that there's no such thing as a green building. It's sort of a dangerous concept that has done, I think, a fair amount of damage. But a building is the most unnatural thing on the landscape. I mean, think about it. We want them to be warm when it's cold outside, cool when it's hot outside, light when it's dark outside, sometimes dark when it's light outside. Of the hundreds of millions of species on the planet, we're willingly prepared to share our homes with maybe a couple dozen. The most powerful force for renewal in nature is rot and decay. Rot and decay in a building is the surest sign that someone has done something wrong. So let's just put aside the idea that a building can be green. Every building is at some level an environmental mugging. We can make the mugging a little bit gentler, or not. Even the idea of the zero net energy building is a little bit misleading. Zero net energy is at some level a bookkeeping coincidence. It means the operational energy matches the production on site. Zero net energy, for the most part, I've yet to see it calculated to include maintenance energy and embodied carbon of construction. So we'll leave that there for the moment. So corollary to that, so that's thought number one. Thought number two is a corollary to that, which is that we can't build our way out of the problems we face. Building more buildings is not necessarily helpful. I think that builders and architects groups need to start giving their highest achievement awards to teams that choose not to build a building on an empty lot. And then we can start thinking a little more realistically about the problem. So what this means is the buildings that we do build, each new building we build is a tremendous responsibility that has to be taken very seriously. We need new buildings to be as few, as energy efficient, and as space efficient as possible. Talked about how homes at least are getting bigger. I have some statistics. In 1950, we had 292 square feet per person. In 2010, it was 927 square feet per person, because not only are homes getting bigger, but households are getting smaller. Interestingly enough, in that same period, 1950 to 2010, the increase in national productivity was dropping at the same incline as house size was increasing. I think the correlation there is that we're now spending a lot more time wandering around our houses. So, and I am a remodeling contractor, but please take my. So keep that in mind when you hear my comments about the tremendous responsibility that new construction represents. Okay, now let's move to retrofits of existing buildings. And it's often, frequently cited statistic is something, of the buildings that will be in existence in 2050 or 2060, or pick your year, 75% or 80% or 90%, pick your percentage, exists now. So we definitely have to figure out what to do with existing buildings. And one thing I'm pretty confident of is that a 21st century building shouldn't burn things indoors. So that's space heating, domestic hot water, cooking, clothes drying. Candles for holidays are fine. Although my wife found some great LED battery-operated tea candles, which are really, really lovely. So we have to move. And it's funny when I put together plans for clients to do this, to move their homes away from burning things indoors. The area I get the most resistance is cooking. And I think it's really funny, but I think it's explained by the fact that most of us have somewhere between 1.5% and 2% Neanderthal DNA. And there's something about the fire on the cave floor that has just stuck with us. But there's more and more research indicating that one of the most polluted environments you will encounter is around your gas cooktop for a whole bunch of reasons, including the fact that most range hoods don't really work very well. We've started to commission our range hood installations, and we have found how easy it is to do badly. Fortunately, this was not a kitchen that we did, but the worst case we tested was a 6-burner Viking range with an enormous range hood rated at 1,200 CFM, cubic feet per minute. We tested it, it actually drew 21 CFM. So a tiny fraction of what it was supposed to, just because the installation was so convoluted. But not only that, it was 73 decibels, which I'm pretty sure is a record for decibels per CFM. I mean, one of my colleagues said it was tantamount to using a leaf blower indoors to dissipate cooking odors. So the last point is that it's really hard to retrofit existing buildings. It is so much easier to get it right the first time. It's so much more cost effective to get it right the first time. The cost of deep energy retrofits is the single strongest argument for more stringent energy codes in new construction. To the point where retrofits are hard, and Mark picked 10% as a hoped for savings target. I think we can do a little better than that. But we have to, when we start looking at the cost per ton of carbon avoided to do retrofits, it gets pretty high pretty fast. The Obama administration put the social cost of carbon at about $40 a ton. We've done deep energy retrofits where it was $300, $400, $500 per ton. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons to do a comprehensive deep energy retrofit, but they're not a scalable solution to the carbon problem. At some point, we have to start allocating that money more effectively. I have estimated that for the cost of 2 or 3 deep energy retrofits of a Lexington single-family home, we could probably buy a U.S. senator. The representatives come even cheaper. So that's something to think about in terms of allocating financial resources for carbon effectiveness. But I don't want you to be pessimistic about fixing houses, because the single most frustrating thing about my evaluation of existing houses is how many opportunities are missed when people are doing routine renovations and maintenance. It's just crazy. How many of you know what a blower door is? All right. So just remember the term, and the next time you're contemplating any sort of invasive work on your house, try to get a blower door test done. Because the single easiest time to improve the thermal performance of your home is when you have walls opened and you can fix the insulation and the air sealing very, very easily, just by testing with the blower door, finding the leaks, and then fixing the leaks. If you wait to put the drywall up and the paint and the trim and the carpet and the furniture to decide to fix the problems with your air sealing and insulation, it's going to be 40 or 50 years before it gets fixed. And we can't be frittering away opportunities that way. There's an awful lot you can do to get that 10, 15, 20% reduction just by being thoughtful about how you fix and maintain and think about your homes. I would encourage you to put together a master plan for your home that weans it off fossil fuels, and just have it in place so that when you need to do something, you know that it fits into the plan. In all likelihood, you're not going to be in the house long enough to implement the full plan, but at least you won't be setting subsequent owners up for more expense and problems than they need. I better shut up there.
Well, that was the funniest talk on retrofits. So taking a theme from Paul, we're going to pass to another Paul. Paul's saying you need to do it right the first time, and so let's talk to Paul Lucas, whose job is to do it right the first time.
And Mark, do you mind if I could sit there?
I'll be happy to switch this away.
Okay, yeah, so I'm the last Paul to speak today. How do you follow that? I am going to talk about new construction, so I'm feeling a little guilty here. But there is an argument to be made to talk about new construction.
It's a start.
You can take into account entropy, the forces entropy. So if a building has a life cycle of 30 years, and all the buildings in the community are a 30-year life cycle, then that means every 30 years that building or parts of it are going to have to be recycled. And so one aim is to try to build buildings that are going to last longer. So why not build buildings that are going to last for 100 years? Or think about how we build buildings made up of multiple different kinds of systems of different life cycles. So office buildings already do that. Office buildings have a shell that might have 50 to 100-year life cycle, and the interior changes. Appliances have a life cycle of 5 to 10 years. If we started financing each one of those different component groups in a different way, you can start finding a better use of finance in the dollars that relates to the way spaces are actually used. So how do we think about these issues as we move forward? What I'd like to do as an architect and an urban designer, someone who loves design, is share with you some 4 projects, 2 of which we did in our office, and 2 that are among some of my favorite around the world, and I think are useful, even though very different sites, in serving as precedents or as case studies that can be mined for sites like Hartwell Avenue. If you look at Hartwell Avenue has, it's your classic suburban development site. There's a lot of asphalt there, a lot of low use of the site itself, 1-story buildings. You can see a separation of uses, distinction between commercial uses and residences. So what can we do, what kind of things can we do in this kind of context? One is thinking about actually designing the buildings we do first, do it well, especially with energy in mind. This house, even though it's in Harvard, has a Lexington connection. It's for 2 clients, former academics who used to live in Lexington, wanted to build a net zero energy home, but couldn't find land in Lexington because they were building these 4,700 square foot homes that were pricing them out of the market. So what we have here on the left is a project that's just been completed. This is a preliminary HERS rating of about -10 to -15. It's going to be confirmed in the months and year to come. And it has 56 panels and produces about 16,000 kWh a year. And what's also interesting about it is it engages a lot of passive strategies. And this is the idea that we have basically all the tools, technologies, and ideas at our hand. We can do this. It's not rocket science at a certain level. So for instance, we just build thicker walls that are made of foot thick, like a double stud construction, and insulate them very well. Put most of our windows on the south side so we gain energy, passive energy. Design our overhangs properly so we get enough shade in the summer and sun in the winter. And if we think about how the building is shaped and sculpted, so it works with the site, works with the sun, works with the way air moves through the spaces, we can actually create, at the very base limit, environments that are where you can save 30, 40, 50, 60%. That's before you start looking at any active systems. Our client was a professor, mathematician who loved numbers, and I mean, if he could, he would have built a whole nother house, or just a roof, just to put more panels on it. We discouraged him to do that. So that would not be cost effective. But he sliced and diced this project every which way you can imagine throughout the whole design process. By the way, we have some videos that come out regularly describing the whole process and its engineering. One of the things that's unique about this project is that it tries to deal with the problem of intermittency. So intermittency is the gap between when you're actually producing energy from the sun during the day and when most people use it, i.e. during the evening or off hours. Now, how do you deal with that with solar? It's a problem, an issue. And now what's happening is there's new developments in batteries. So there's these beautiful batteries by this German company called Sonnen. They are gorgeous. They're so beautiful, you'd want to put them in your living room or your bedroom. To me, it looks like they're almost designed by the same engineers who did the Audi A7, if you know that car. And what's great is you can get them different sizes, and they can carry you over for that problem of intermittency. Definitely during the day. Sometimes, if all systems go down, depending on how many panels you got and batteries, you can go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. This is what the project looks like right now, and it's about a week away from construction. It's a relatively small, compact house using one of the principles from Sarah Sasanka, not so big house. It's about 2,200 square feet. There were surprises in building it. Like one thing is these batteries weigh a ton. I mean, literally a ton. They're about we have 2 batteries up there, so we had to do a little re-engineering to make sure that the batteries wouldn't come crashing through the kitchen. So let me shift to a different scale. Now, this is not our project. This is one of my favorite projects in Sweden, called the BO1. The BO01 means live or live 01. It was started in 2001 in Malmö. It's a retrofit of a brownfield site in Harvard. And what I love about it is that, and this is kind of one of the core principles that I'd like everybody to think about, that everything you build, if we have to build and we can't retrofit our places, then let's make sure that it's producing more energy than it's creating, than it needs. And this is one of the principles that governs this development in this community. And it's a highly integrated networks district system, which includes wind, because it's right on the water, It includes geothermal, it's got great access, also includes seawater, PV, both electric and thermal solar. And it mixes those systems and integrates them so it can feed people within the community. Not only that, it has a really interesting development process. So instead of all being developed by one developer at one time, where everything looks the same, you have multiple developers parceling out the blocks. You've got multiple architects developing, and in fact, you've got local participation, so users actually interact with designers to create this kind of natural variety that doesn't look like. This happens to be picking up on some of the themes locally, i.e. the kind of medieval quality of the streets in Malmo, as well as the different colors that are common in many places like Norway and Sweden. It also integrates the landscape. It thinks about water. How do we save water? How do we deal with storm surge? How do we think about restoring our landscape? This is especially important in Lexington. We have a lot of wetlands. So anyways, it's a great project. It happens to become a tourist site. So many people are going there now to see it. The second project that we didn't do, which I wish we had, was just a great project. The Audubon Freiburg project was also done late 90s, early 2000s. This is a retrofit of a military base done in 1936. And what they did was develop a new community that includes, it's a phased community. They roughly did about 100 units of housing at each stretch. But they didn't just do housing. This is another message I want folks to think about. How do you combine housing with other kinds of uses? Because you can start using them passively, i.e. the energy that's created in a building, like an office building, which needs cooling even on cool days, that you can capture that energy and transfer it to residential uses. Those are the kind of things that are being done in these kinds of projects. And what's aesthetically interesting is you can start thinking about how do we integrate these new technologies and create a new kind of architecture and urban design that becomes expressive, has all kinds of opportunities for new types of design modes. It also creates more energy when it's needed. In this case, 100 people who are living in this property, homeowners, get a check every month for the extra energy they're producing. So the last project I want to show you is something we did as part of a research project down in Columbia Point, along with Arab engineers, C2 landscape architects, ecologists from UMass, venture capitalists and others. And the idea was to look at how could you create a zero energy community, net zero energy community, using some of the principles from some of the precedents that I showed and others. And the principle is also taken from the living building concept in Seattle. And that is that each parcel should produce at least 105% of its energy through renewable sources. So if you think of each one of these blocks as being developed independently by a developer or a set of architects, that each block could be very expressive in responding to its own commercial or use needs, but it would already integrate an array of systems that are available to us: geothermal, solar, wind, and in this case, hydro. And through that kind of collection of different kinds of uses or technologies, you find a way to get to 105% combined with passive. And you create new kinds of ways of integrating the ecology of place, the landscape, the urban quality, the culture of place, and create places that are truly unique and take advantage of all the kinds of technologies and ideas that are out in the marketplace. Thank you.
And Lisa's going to close things out here.
So Mark has sketched at a high level what we need to do with specific actions that we can take to get started. And my colleagues here have shown that change is possible and in some cases really exciting. But change, particularly change to our own homes, often is inconvenient and requires upfront investment. So why do this? And the answer is because our lives, our livelihood, and the future of our children and grandchildren is at stake. Because continuing our dependence on fossil fuels, in the end, is far more costly to our health, our economic and political stability, and our habitat than transitioning to a clean energy economy. And because we need to take responsibility for the emissions that we generate and start becoming the solution rather than the problem. Oh, is it up there? Oh, there we go. Our climate is changing at an alarming rate, and humans are the major cause. 9 of the hottest years on record have occurred in the last 10 years. The poles are warming twice as fast as other areas of the globe, destabilizing atmospheric and ocean currents that have determined global weather for centuries. Here in the US, we're seeing more extreme weather, like the rapid succession of hurricanes last fall, with 2 massive cyclones hitting Texas, Puerto Rico, and Florida, and multi-year droughts and wildfires in the West and Southwest. Temperatures in New England are rising faster than elsewhere in the US. In fact, scientists predict that our temperature will rise 50% faster than the globe as a whole. We're expected to see an increase in yearly rainfall, but that rainfall won't be distributed evenly. There'll be heavy downpours in winter and spring, and possible droughts and heat waves in the summer. And as a coastal state, we'll cope not only with severe storms, but rising sea levels, storm surges, and coastal erosion. The American College of Physicians prepared this graphic on, there we go, on climate change on human health. While it was designed with health impacts in mind, it can be used to talk about analogous costs. The inner circle represents the cycle of climate change, with increasing CO2 leading to rising temperatures, more extreme weather, and warmer and rising seas. The next layer is the first degree impacts. And as you can see, they range from air pollution to water quality impacts, extreme heat, water and food supply. And let's just take a look at a couple. Severe weather. Superstorm Sandy on our back door, basically, on our doorstep, 157 deaths, $65 billion. Harvey and Irma combined, 200 official deaths, and Moody estimates up to $200 billion in damages. These include damage to property, infrastructure, and lost productivity while people were out of work for days and schools were closed. Changes in vector ecology. Warming temperatures lengthen the season and range of disease-bearing insects like ticks and mosquitoes. Increased humidity from flooding and rainfall can increase breeding. Incidence of familiar disease like Lyme and West Nile will increase, and diseases like dengue, Zika, and chikungunya, typically associated with the tropics, will move north. Local-born Zika virus transmission has been reported in Texas and South Florida. Water quality impacts. Flooding can overwhelm sewage systems, as it did in Houston during Hurricane Harvey, which dropped trillions of gallons of water on the city. Coliform and E. coli exploded in the waters running through the streets. Environmental degradation. The U.S. is already seeing the first climate change refugees within our borders. Communities in Louisiana and Alaska have asked the federal government to fund relocation for entire populations due to climate change. This is sobering for life as we know it. But we can mitigate the worst impacts of climate change by acting responsibly now. We can reduce our carbon footprint by planning for a transition to renewable energy sources. Individually and collectively, we can make choices today that ensure a livable tomorrow for our children, our grandchildren, and ourselves. In doing so, we not only make our lives and the world healthier, we also build our economy. We keep energy dollars local, and we create new jobs in renewable energy here in Massachusetts. There's every reason in the world to do this. Let's make this happen.
So as you can tell, we have a fabulous panel here, and we'd love to have some questions and comments from you now that you've heard where we're starting out. So who's got some questions?
You mentioned the move from natural gas to what affects your major air quality that's moving will drive?
So Mark, I think you should repeat the question as you answer.
I'm just trying to figure out what the question is. So you're asking if we move from heating with natural gas to heating with electricity, is there going to be a difference in humidity in the house? Is that what you?
I think what you're referring to is the perception that forced air systems dry out a house more than a hydronic forced water system.
Right.
Yeah, that's not, what dries out a house in the winter is air leaks. You know, a poor building enclosure. You know, as the air infiltration into the house, cold air infiltrates into the house, is warmed up, rises, and then exits through the upper parts of the house. So you're getting a consistent air change in the winter, and that air that's coming in is very cold, it's not holding a lot of water. So as it infiltrates, it dries out the indoor air. And that happens regardless of heating system type. If you have a particularly poorly installed duct system, it can make it worse, but for the most part, it's a phenomenon that's related to air leaky houses, and switching to an air source heat pump system, a forced air system from a hydronic system should not appreciably dry out the house. Typically, when you do make that switch from burning gas to putting an air source heat pump system in, it's accompanied by some weatherization work, some insulation and air sealing improvements. Those are going to serve to tighten up the house enough that the air changes resulting from convection are reduced, so the dehumidification that you get should also be reduced. I mean, I don't know the house, but there's a good chance I would recommend doing very little to that house. I mean, we'd have to, let's pick our battles. Let's be sensible about this. You know, there's, and if you, you know, the real solution, it's going to be very hard to solve our problems at the building level. You know, if we can decarbonize the grid, we solve an awful lot of problems, probably more cost effectively. It's interesting you showed the Malmö project in Sweden. You know, Scandinavia, for the most part, is achieving decarbonization goals through the grid. Their building standards are not particularly more rigorous than ours for a similar climate. But you know, we have a tradition of trying to solve all our problems at the building level, and it's just not cost effective. So if you and your 250-year-old house applied your time and resources towards advocacy that decarbonized the grid, it wouldn't matter. You know, you buy that house a lot of freedom, and there's less pressure on that house to perform better if the energy that's coming to that house is lower carbon. So that would be my approach.
I would just say in particular about heating systems in these homes where we're heating with natural gas, which is better than oil, obviously, but it's hard to retrofit that aged home.
I'd also say another thing in answer to your question about what do you do with these historic homes. One of the things that we have as a goal as part of our getting net zero plan is that we're asking our historic architects to develop what we call historic guidelines for renovating historic homes. Now in Lexington, we got some very special constraints in certain districts where certain things are allowed and certain things are not allowed. And it would be very helpful to people who live in those homes if they had some guidelines that were written down that were, if they comply with those guidelines, they have some confidence that they comply with the Historic District Commission. So that's one of the things we're hoping to do. And I've been encouraging our state Commissioner Judson to do the same thing at a state level. She lives in a 220-year-old house and is very interested in that idea. So perhaps we're going to get some traction at the state level as well, that they can put some energy into that at the state level.
Picking picking up a little bit on this grid comment, one of your earlier slides showed the little uptick with the closing of Vermont. Could you comment on what our future is there? I mean, Pilgrim will be another uptick, I guess, and then what?
Paul, you want to take? So the question was, what's our future for our overall grid in Massachusetts?
So right, so you make a very good point that as the remaining nuclear plants close, we will see an increase in CO2 emissions from the grid. I think the future is with the big offshore wind projects. So there'll be massive offshore wind being built off the coast of New England and New York, and I think that's what we get to be making most of our clean energy.
And I add one thing to that too. We have a renewable portfolio standard in the state. So that's a requirement for the utility companies, the competitive suppliers that own power plants to increase their generation of renewables by 1% a year. And there's a bill on the table right now that could increase that in Massachusetts by 2% a year, which we should certainly be supporting. So when I look at, from a housing perspective, 22% of U.S. energy consumption is in the residential built environment, 40% total. You look at the grid getting greener over time. You look at us, as Mark pointed out, the most energy efficient state in the United States. Ben Downing's perspective of that, one of our state senators, was that just means we're the best of the worst, but we're still the best of the worst. But we can see, the average home in Massachusetts uses, I hear different numbers, 109 million, 130 million BTUs of energy annually. We can drop that down to 80, and we can, in the state of California now, 2020, all residential new construction in that state needs to be net zero. There was just an executive order signed by the governor of Oregon that looks at the same plan, net zero new construction residential, in a 5 or 6 year plan. If we start to put those three pieces together, we can start to see if there's a solution here. Maybe not fast enough, but it's a solution that there's a plan that's out there to be able to put this together. We also have a state building code that gets more and more rigorous. The design of that is by 2030 to have all homes that are under the current building code at that time. They would be net zero at that point. So there's a framework to be able to get this done.
The other thing that's happening is you're seeing a lot of towns and institutions taking the leadership role. So a lot of universities now are going net zero as much as they can because they know the students are attracted to that and they want to see that. And so we're seeing that in companies and other institutions that are being more responsible.
And along the lines of both of those comments, the BTUs per square foot, they don't use these numbers in Europe, but the BTUs per square foot in Europe are about half of what they are here in the United States, so they're well ahead of us on that. Yes.
Along the lines of the new municipal solar array Hartwell Lab, are there other opportunities in town to put up more solar arrays, perhaps municipal parking lots or something like that? Is that a possibility there?
So the question is, are there additional locations for solar PV arrays in town? The building projects that we're looking at are all being structured in a way to be solar ready. The roofs are being designed, the parking areas are being anticipated to use solar canopies. And we continue to look. So the answer is yes, but they'll be coming project by project.
Yeah, I see a lot of very good ideas. I'm wondering what the plan is to implement that. Are you planning on incentives for homeowners to do retrofits, things of that nature?
Well, there's a lot of different thoughts along that lines. The question is, how are we going to encourage people to do this, right? And so one of the first things you want to do in order to encourage people to take action is to understand where they are. And so a lot of people have no idea where they are right now, especially in the residential area. And so there's a number of different initiatives going on at the state level as well as potentially local level to sort of be able to give your home a miles per gallon rating, so to speak, so that you have some idea with consistency across the state of how to measure this and how to report this and where you are. So once you know where you are, then you can start to figure out what needs to happen from there. So Craig, you had a couple thoughts that you were saying in terms of at the time of sale, one of the things we might be thinking about is asking people to disclose their energy information at the time of sale.
Yeah, there was a bill that was on the table last year. It was it was attached to the Energy Omnibus bill that moved through in July that Senator Downing had sponsored. Had strong resistance from Massachusetts Association of Realtors. I'm in big trouble because I supported the bill from Massachusetts Association of Realtors perspective. That bill is being rewritten, and with my last understanding of that bill is that it would be phased in so that by 2020, at the point of sale, you would need to give a potential home buyer and home MPG or a DOE home energy score, some combination of the two, at the point of sale. The issue becomes, and this is the real issue, there were a lot of, Massachusetts Association of Realtors really threw the kitchen sink at that bill, unfortunately. But there are some legitimate issues with that bill. I teach the high performance home class out in Martha's Vineyard. It takes them 3 months to get someone from Mass A to come out and do a home energy assessment. It's not uncommon for me. I'll get a call on Tuesday from someone that wants to put their home on the market on Thursday, and we'll have 2 open houses on Saturday and Sunday, and we'll have 10 offers by Tuesday at 1 o'clock. If it takes 3 months to get that home energy assessment in the hands of the potential buyer, you can see where that would create a problem. I like the new bill in that it phases it into 2020, and there's a framework for being able to scale up, particularly since we lost Next Step Living, to be able to meet some of these challenges in the marketplace. But I just want to add one more point in terms of solutions, possible solutions that are out there, and throw this out to Joe to get your perspective on this. We have Chapter 40R in the state, which is the smart growth overlay map. So all building codes are state mandated since the 70s. There's the one state building code with the stretch code option. But all zoning is local. So each particular town enforces their own zoning. 40R gives opportunities to be able to lay smart growth overlay maps onto certain sections of a city or a town to be able to develop new properties, and zoning is grandfathered in. If you're an existing home in that overlay district, it wouldn't affect you, but any new construction would be subject to any rules in that overlay map. Are there any opportunities like that, Joe, in this community to use 40R?
So I think in general, that's, as we go through the comprehensive plan process right now, taking that into consideration, do we want to apply that broadly or in a localized fashion, should be part of the dialogue, absolutely.
Yeah. Or incentivizing net zero construction in some way, and density bonuses, or...
Right. One of the things we recently met with our legislative delegation here, one of the things that I raised from a sustainability perspective is to look at state incentives comparable to what is done for complete streets, where communities that are taking an approach to a holistic view of transportation, that they're eligible for certain kinds of program incentives. That the state does the same thing for these kinds of energy systems. Right. There are a few, but it would be nice to broaden that and take a more aggressive approach.
One of the things I was thinking about, Craig, you had talked to me about a month or two ago about some statistics about how fast homes sell and days on market when you actually have this information as part of the sale, and I was wondering if you might say.
Yeah, so in Chicago, it's been on the books for a long time that there was a requirement that was never policed for homeowners to give up their home energy usage at the point of sale. The MLS there, they've got some advantages because no one heats with oil, which is not metered, it's all electricity and natural gas in Chicago, so it's a little easier to do. But there's now an option that there's an opt-in where the home seller can disclose their energy use, and it automatically auto-populates into the multiple listing service. And what NRED, the MLS in Chicago, has found some pretty interesting data. It doesn't matter whether the number is high or low, but if the seller is disclosing, is voluntarily doing it, it's selling the home 22 days faster than homes that aren't doing it. Just the voluntary disclosure of that information. It's interesting information.
Hi, thanks for this presentation, it's really terrific. I had a question about, you had the gorgeous battery at that Harvard house, and I know battery storage is one of the main issues with regard to the photovoltaic panels, et cetera. Is there any kind of, I don't know, are there updates to that? Is that anything that's going to be in the near future where, regular people can get, large battery storage or more productive storage batteries more available? Any updates? Yeah, right, Tesla batteries, sure.
Yeah, the market
How
is changing, evolving, prices are coming down. There's more players in the market. Tesla obviously has been very good at how they promote their products. Aside, I was looking at their tiles, their solar tiles, and they look beautiful, but when you look at it really closely, zoom in, you just realize it's beautiful Photoshop work. There's still a lot of questions that need to be addressed in terms of construction as it relates to how you start integrating with conventional roof forms and so on. So the long and short of it is there's a lot happening in the field, the prices are coming down. And we are seeing, Europe already, there's companies like Zonen who are doing beautiful things. Yeah, it is expensive. However, if you start parceling out the investments that you're making in these systems, and people that we work with who evaluate this, the company name is called SolWorks, with the Lexington connection there, Ben Cumbie, they will actually do an analysis and say, okay, so you're going to invest X number of dollars in a battery that's 3 kW all the way up to 16 kW. What's the return on that? And how can you optimize your energy use and actually capture all the energy that you're generating from your panels? And that number actually is very attractive depending on the project. And sometimes we do, maybe not as good as this stock market, but it's our average stock market. So that if you start parceling out that calculation, you can make it a strong number.
One note I'd just like to make about batteries that's important from a real estate sales perspective. A lot, the allure of getting a battery is to go off the grid. I mean, to be completely independent of the grid, particularly when you get up to New Hampshire for the grid die state. But it's important to note right now that Fannie Mae, their guidance is very clear that anything that's off the grid can't be sold into the secondary mortgage market. So just, and that may change as we get more off-grid homes. Fannie Mae may change their guidance on that, but that's the current guidance right now.
So just related to that, as relates to banks, on another project we had a client who made the investment in renewable energy and so on, and they were looking for a little more money from the bank. And the process that we had to go through to make a justification for that extra investment was tedious at best. In fact, they weren't able to get everything they thought they would be getting. So there's a battle that's going on, especially when you have somebody in a very remote place in the middle of the country might be evaluating a project up here.
So the other thing you want to take into account is that we've been talking about residential energy storage. It's a very different thing. So when we're all residents, we pay one amount for our kilowatt hours. It's the same rate at noon, not at 9 o'clock at night, all day long. It doesn't matter how much energy we use, it's the same rate. It makes for very different economic analysis than for whether it makes sense to do energy storage for our high school, for example, or for the new Hastings school. Commercial rates are very different. It turns out that almost for the bigger schools in our district, it turns out that the Eversource rate is almost all based on peak demand. And so you get your bill based, it's sort of like driving your car, and if you happen to drive at 92 miles an hour at 1 minute during the month, you got billed at that amount. Instead of your average rate of 25 miles an hour for the rest of the thing, you get billed at that. That's sort of the way we get billed for our commercials rates. So there's significant value for energy storage in terms of reducing the peak demand of our buildings, which is about half of our energy costs for our buildings. And I haven't told Sean this yet, but he provided me with 15-minute data for our buildings, and I've run them against the energy storage models. It looks like for our high school, we can save $143,000 a year by shaving our peak demand, just by putting batteries. You can't make that same argument in residential, but it's something that is making a lot of sense for commercial and municipal world.
And one of the comments I made early on is you can't always get what you want right away, so you keep moving forward. So when we designed the new Hastings School, the new fire station, and I think even the LCP, which is a smaller structure, we aren't putting battery storage in now, but we are putting a location for battery storage. So as the price points for that and the systems become practical, the building was designed anticipating bringing that online so that we can take advantage of it. And we have to do that across the board for all sorts of these kinds of systems.
Is there any indication that the bond rating agencies are beginning to look more favorably on municipalities that have adopted a net zero?
The latest news last week, actually, is that Moody's came out and said they're going to downgrade communities on their bond rating who do not take any action to respond to climate change.
So the good thing is we're AAA, and we are. So we expect to stay. Way in the back, I saw a hand that was there for a long time. I think right here. All right.
Right here. I have a couple of comments. First, I would like to call attention to the lights in this building, in this room in particular, because they are compact fluorescents. And by replacing them with LEDs, you would have a light that both has a longer light and that cuts the electricity demand in this particular room by a significant amount. Probably the lighting would go down by 20 or 25%.
So David, that's a great point, and these
Okay.
are LEDs.
They are
It
LEDs.
will take a while to replace them. I'm not suggesting you tear them out and throw them away. I'm saying that when they die, you replace them with a longer light.
I think it was.
These are actually currently a Philips LED
Yeah.
light.
Yes, these are
Those are
Philips.
an LED.
These are Philips LEDs, and Sean, who's answering the question, I think 3 years ago, got them all for free on a special end of the year sale.
They were compact fluorescents. The second thing I'd like to say is that we had a house that was built as a barn in the 1880s, and which we moved into in the 1960s. And over a period of time, starting in 1974, without installing solar or anything else, we cut its energy usage to approximately 50% of what it was. Although the last set of improvements, which were the energy efficient windows, actually may not have achieved payback because it was done about 5 years ago, and in fact, the house is being leveled. So, but you can do quite a lot with blown-in insulation and changing to LEDs or changing even to fluorescent lights and improving the efficiency of your utilities, your various appliances, without, as I say, going to totally destroying the house.
I just had a question about making sure we're getting a good return on efforts. When you talk about, I think you guys touched on it, but when we talk about 200-plus-year-old houses, we talk about each of us individually doing things and patting ourselves on the back. I mean, my house has solar panels, and I get letters from developers who want to tear it down. So we can do a lot of these things where we're kind of smugly working very, very locally, but we want to. I think we want to make sure that we're doing it, getting a good return on investment. Coming back to what you had said about it's better to improve what we have than to tear down and start over kind of idea, because there is sunk cost, there is sunk carbon, there is sunk energy in every single building that we already have. And I just want to make sure this noble effort that you guys are putting together as you move into the next phase, I want to know that you're thinking about not squeezing that last bit of emissions out, but getting the high returns, and maybe we end up putting energy elsewhere, focus elsewhere, and don't worry about the last 10%. I just want to know that you're thinking that a little bit of that way. Reassure me.
Thank you. And they all look away on the Group W bench.
I've had energy audits, and that's sort of one level of help, and then there's the level of a massive, big retrofit. I'm wondering what kinds of resources in the middle for maybe some other low-hanging fruit that I haven't seen are available.
Well, right now, the town is running something called the Lexington Energy Challenge. And we won a grant from National Grid, who is sort of sponsoring this program. And for people that come and get an energy assessment, but not just an energy assessment, but take the next steps, it turns out there's a lot of great incentives from the state right now to air seal, as Paul was talking about before. One of the best things you can do for your house, one of the greatest things you can do for instant health and comfort of your home is to air seal it properly. And I believe, Paul, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe they have lifted, they used to have a cap on the amount of insulation and air sealing they do. I think through the end of the year, I don't think they're quite meeting their goals. If you call these people up, I think the cap is lifted. There's no cap at all. So they're comping you on 75% of the cost of doing insulation, and they used to do that with a cap of $2,000 a year, and I believe until the end of the year, that number is infinite. So if you can, well, whatever, how much ever you can do. The air sealing work is actually free as well, so in the program. So what we're seeing right now is that some of the best things you can do is actually, Paul, you should talk about this, about, actually designing so that you're using your dollars most effectively. Paul and I have had this conversation before. You could spend $150,000 on your house. What's the best $3,000 to spend? What's the best $5,000 to spend? Oftentimes that's on air sealing.
Let me just jump in, because I had done an assessment about 5 years ago and said, who needs to do it again? Well, I took advantage of this program this spring, and they came in, did air sealing again and insulation. And my heating bills this past month, which is the first real month we've had, when I compare them on a degree day comparison to previous years, they dropped by about 30%. I was amazed. It really is an effective tool, and if you've done it before, several years ago, it's worth going through it again.
One of the challenges is, we're the only state that I know of that has the no cost of energy assessment, right? I mean, every other state you pay $100, $300 to get a home energy assessment done. And we still only have 25% of homeowners that have taken advantage of that program, which is just, it's craziness to me. And then the conversion rate on top of that, of converting to actually take action, is significantly less. One of the drivers of this bill that Massachusetts Association of Realtors hates so much is that a home energy assessment score at the point of sale would be a driver to push the existing home marketplace because it's a point of sale mandate. And you'd see the improvements there. A lot of people, I'm really excited to say that a lot of people in the real estate trade organizations at the upper levels are looking at these issues in very serious ways. One of the things that with the DOE home energy score that came out as an agreement between Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and DOE was home energy scores go on the opposite scale that HERS ratings do, where lower is better. With DOE home energy scores, which are used on residential existing homes, they go from 0 to 10, 10 being the best. But if you have a DOE home energy score of 6 or higher, the buyer of that home gets to lower their debt ratio or increase their debt ratio by 2%. That won't mean a lot here in Lexington necessarily, but in Malden or Everett, that 2% can really be a game changer in terms of the buying power that a buyer has for a home that has that increased efficiency. And we know that the default rate on homes with increased efficiency is also significantly lower, and it's good for the lenders.
So the energy audit guys will actually do the ceiling, because every time they've come to my house, the 2 times, I guess, they've offered to loan me money so I can drill holes in the wall and blow in insulation, things I wasn't willing to do at that point. But do they actually do some ceiling work?
Yes, yes. So where we are right now in Lexington, we're actually doing a lot better than Craig was suggesting. Through this most recent, I think there's been a sort of change in the quality of the home energy assessments and the delivery of the home energy assessments. I had a similar experience that Joe's had. I've had home energy assessments in the past, and they basically said there's nothing you can do. And now I had home energy assessments, and they gave me some really good positive things to do. And so I think there's been some sort of evolution in the marketplace. They're getting better at this, delivering this, understanding what to do for homes. And in Lexington this year, more than half of the people who have gotten an energy assessment have gotten a follow-up with either putting air sealing, weatherization, or upgrading their boilers. And so there's, I think about 60% of the people who've gotten a home energy assessment have come in and said, this actually makes a lot of sense to get this done. And so that is actually earning the town. I haven't told Joe these numbers, but today I think we made $37,000 for the town. So National Grid is just, the more people get home energy assessments, we get a little bit more money in our general fund. Yes, you can weigh in with that.
I think I could probably do home energy assessments on a semi-annual basis, and in about 20 years, we'd probably be in pretty good shape. I'm intrigued by the idea of a master plan and wondering about where do you go to look for that, because I'm in the middle. I have a roughly 100-year-old house. It's more hysterical than historical. The systems that are in there and what's going on. And I know we need windows. I'd love to replace the oil. But just taking the siding off and seeing all the places where insulation could go would probably be the most efficient way to spend my money on it. So I'm interested in where do you go for the master plan, and what's the costs associated to getting one in the first place?
There's not, I think it's up to you consumers to help create a market for that sort of master planning exercise, because there's not a lot of people who will work with you on it. I mean, it's a particular crusade of ours. One of the issues that can happen with deep energy retrofits is you may encounter a house that has a brand new roof and replacement windows. It needs completely new siding, and needs half. To do a deep energy retrofit, half of the finishes you're pulling off have a service life left of many decades, and that seems like a step backwards. We haven't talked a lot about this, but there's any construction project or retrofit project is front-loading the carbon tremendously, and I think that's something we have to be very, very careful about. And the embodied carbon of those materials we have to be very careful about, because we don't, the short term is really of critical importance. So our response to encountering that over and over again was to say, okay, well let's look at the house. Okay, if this house is going to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, say in the year 2050, what is it going to look like? do a vision for that and then work backwards. Okay, so your mechanical system has X number of years left in it. When it goes, you're going to put in this system. And just go through all the components so that you know what you're going to do when that component fails. You're not going to. With mechanical equipment, it's particularly important because the water heater and the boiler, they do have a tendency to fail the night before a major family gathering or a holiday. And so the tendency is to replace them with whatever's in the plumber's truck. So you've got another 30, 40, you've locked in that same level of performance or worse for another 30 or 40 years. So anticipate that failure, head it off, and put in the system you want. So who puts together that plan? I would say if you've worked with a contractor before or an architect before, talk to them about it. And they may not know exactly what you're talking about, but at least you've planted a seed, and maybe you can walk them through the exercise and start getting people in our line of work thinking longer term, so that collectively we can stop fixing homes by reproducing the conditions that caused the failure to begin with.
Another thing you can do is, if there are some engineers who are very adept at using energy modeling software. The software, it's generally speaking complicated and time consuming still, especially in older projects, but you could look into that. But it's not inexpensive, and then so you have to look at what the value of that is. But if you're looking at it really in the long term, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I think that would be a good thing to consider.
The other thing I would suggest, Paul mentioned earlier, this notion that if you're having anybody into your house, ask them for a blower door test. And so one of the things that happens when you get a blower door test is if you do this right, you come away with where the problems are in your house and some sort of analysis about how big those problems are. So you can, at least in my mind, I'm sort of an engineering kind of, I like to run the numbers. You can sort of say, well, there's a massive hole here, and the payback on that is going to be highest to fix this thing. And then there's a smaller thing here, and you can sort of go through and say, if I was going to do the whole house, maybe it's going to cost me $100,000, but I can do 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 at a time. And this is where my budget is able to handle it. And you can sort of prioritize that. You can also prioritize it, maybe not necessarily in terms of where the biggest holes are, but where you spend the most time. This is the room where I want to feel most comfortable.
I was also suggesting challenge Paul involved with this, or anybody doing improvements on their home, solar PV, or even the basics of air sealing and insulation. The contractor that comes, pull out. You can find the Appraisal Institute's Green Residential Energy Efficient Addendum very easily. The last one's May 2017. Have them fill that out and put it in your material. And when you go to sell your home, if you want to realize the equity in that investment, give that to the listing broker. And if the listing broker doesn't know what that document is, find a new listing broker at that point. Because they're the ones that are going to be able to turn that into the equity, the list price, be able to talk about the improvements intelligently to a buyer, be able to convey that information onto the appraiser, who will then take it to the underwriter, and will be able to see your investment become equity.
Well, it's 9 o'clock here, so I would say we've come to the end of our evening. I see lots of other people raising their hands. The panel people will be happy to stay and answer any questions you have at the end. I certainly will. We in Lexington, I just conclude by saying, just won an award, Leading by Example Award from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for sustainability efforts. And there's a poster over there that gave us for that award. And I would suggest that this is the kind of thing that's getting the net zero thing that we want to thank you for coming, because it's people like you that come to these things and care about these things and support these efforts that allows us to be in a situation where we're able to be leading by example. Thank you very much.